18 July, 387 BC. The morning began like any other. Dry wind across the Tiber, reeds whispering in the heat. Farmers turned soldiers stood on the Allia plain, squinting against the sun, their shields gleaming dull bronze. They had marched out quickly, certain the northern raiders would scatter at the sight of Rome's standards. No trenches, no scouts, no walls. Just confidence, the kind bred by too many easy victories. Their commanders called it a skirmish. Their sons would call it the day the world cracked. The ground shimmered in the distance, the air trembling with heat and silence. The Tiber moved slow beside them, shallow, indifferent. No omens, no thunder, only the waiting. The Romans laughed, loosened armor, and looked north, never imagining that beyond the haze, an army was already watching them. Within the hour, they would learn what arrogance costs and what empire feels like when it begins to die. Then came the Gauls, the Senones, led by Brennus, a warlord from beyond the Alps. They did not march like soldiers. They surged like a storm, tall, pale, wild-eyed, their hair lime-stiffened into crowns of fire. Bronze torques glinted at their throats, blue paint streaked across bare chests. Their laughter carried over the wind. To the Romans, they looked less like men than gods of war, raw, furious, unbound. They came, wrote Livy, with the sound of 1,000 storms. Shields beaten with swords became thunder. Their horns, a roar from another world. Even the crows lifted from the river reeds, frightened by the noise. Rome had fought disciplined foes before, Etruscans, Samnites, Sabines, but never this. These were not armies of order. They were chaos given form, and that chaos was coming fast. When the first Gallic horn sounded, it split the sky in two. The Senones charged, bronze flashing, voices breaking through dust and sun. The Romans braced and faltered. The right wing bent first, then the left, and suddenly the center vanished. Shields clashed once, then dropped. The plain dissolved into screams. Men stumbled backward, tripping over bodies, blinded by dust. Those nearest the river turned and ran, their sandals kicking up mud. The Tiber, swollen from summer rains, waited at their backs. Panic drove them into the water. Hundreds, maybe thousands, their armor dragging them down like anchors. Some reached the far bank, gasping, weeping. Others disappeared beneath the reeds, bubbles rising where they sank. A few standards floated sideways, silent, unclaimed. The river bore witness, red and gleaming in the sun. It would be said later that day that more Romans drowned than were killed by swords. There were no commands now, no formations, no courage. Only the sound of sandals beating dry earth. The Roman line had become a mob, fleeing south toward the hills, eyes wide with disbelief. Centurions vanished into the chaos. Flags fell. One soldier, breathless and bleeding, dropped his shield and kept running. The Gallic laughter rolled after them, low, booming, merciless. Men called for their brothers and heard no answer. The plain that had once echoed with the rhythm of Roman discipline was now a place of confusion and dust. Behind them, flames caught in the dry reeds, black smoke climbing into a white sky. Some looked back once and saw the standards of Rome fallen and trampled. Others never looked back at all. This was not a battle anymore. It was collapse. The sound of empire learning it could break. At the center of it all moved Brennus, not rushing, not shouting, only walking through ruin. His blade dragged a line through the dirt as he passed the bodies of men who had never known fear until today. His warriors cheered behind him, scattering loot, severing heads, singing to their gods. The road to Rome stretched ahead, clear and silent, as if the earth itself had opened the gates. No walls guarded it, no legions waited. The city of destiny lay naked before strangers. Brennus lifted his sword toward the horizon, and the wind carried his laughter. To later generations, he would become a monster. To his men, a prophet. But in that hour, he was something simpler. Inevitability. The unthinkable had happened. Rome, the eternal, was about to burn. By sunset, silence returned. The air stank of iron and dust. Smoke drifted low over the plain, curling around the bodies of 40,000 dead. The Tiber flowed on, unmoved, carrying with it helmets, shields, and men who would never see home again. A single laurel wreath lay in the mud, half buried beside a broken spear. Some Romans would later say the gods had turned away, that Jupiter himself had abandoned them. Others whispered that arrogance had drawn the disaster like lightning. Whatever the truth, something sacred had broken at the Allia. The Romans who fled would reach the city only to find it defenseless. The Gauls would come after them. Fire would follow. But on this day, in this place, the empire to be learned the first law of greatness. Before Rome could rule the world, it had to learn how to lose it. 3 years before the disaster, Rome stood radiant and invincible. The century-long war with Veii, the proud Etruscan citadel, had finally ended in triumph. Its treasures filled the markets. Its people filled the slave pens. New lands stretched beyond the Tiber, golden in the morning sun. The city swelled with the rhythm of growth, temples rising, forges roaring, marble gleaming under fresh paint. The forum buzzed with the noise of ambition. Senators spoke with the calm of gods, their togas bright, their words heavy with confidence. The priests read auspices that promised only glory. Farmers in the hills sang of Rome's destiny, believing it now fixed among the stars. The people looked at their city, vast, rich, and restless, and saw not a fragile republic, but eternity beginning. For the first time, Rome mistook prosperity for permanence. The smoke rising from its hearths carried both triumph and a warning. Beneath the marble and gold, Rome trembled. The victory at Veii had fed the rich more than the city. Vast estates spread across conquered lands, while the plebeians, the soldiers who bled for them, returned to hunger and debt. The patricians tightened their fists on power. The poor tightened their belts. In the forum, disputes over debt and land flared louder than prayers. Bread grew scarce, tempers shorter. The Senate, armored in tradition, refused to bend. Rome looked solid, but its foundations were clay. In the fields, farmers drilled as soldiers by day, only to be crushed by taxes at night. The legions marched in perfect lines, even as the Republic stumbled over its own pride. The cracks in Rome's strength weren't carved by enemies. They were self-inflicted, invisible, spreading, waiting for the right tremor. And that tremor was already walking toward them. Far beyond the settled valleys of Italy, another world moved to older rhythms. The Gauls, wanderers of the rivers and forests, followed the seasons like tides. Among them, the Senones, fierce and free, hunted through oak groves where druids sang to unseen gods. Their chieftains wore torques of gold. Their warriors' cloaks dyed in the colors of fire and sky. They lived not behind walls but beneath clouds, their strength drawn from the wild and their unity from kinship. To Rome, they were myths, the restless tribes beyond the snow. But the Alps were no longer a barrier. They were a passage. The Senones followed the scent of new lands and richer soil, driving herds and wagons toward the dawn. They sought not conquest but space, until insult made their movement a storm. In the quiet forests of Gaul, thunder gathered, and the first echoes rolled south. When the Senones descended into Etruria and besieged the city of Clusium, its people turned in desperation to Rome. The Senate, proud and secure, sent envoys, 3 sons of the noble house of Fabius, not to plead, but to command. They carried Rome's name like a sword. Yet diplomacy turned to arrogance. When the Gauls advanced, one of the Fabii broke sacred law and joined the fight, striking down a Gallic chieftain. To Brennus, the Senones' leader, this was no mere insult. It was sacrilege. He sent messengers to demand justice. The Senate refused. Rome believed its word untouchable, but the North had no patience for arrogance disguised as authority. The Senones broke camp. They gathered their herds, their families, their gods, and began to march. The sound of their wagons was the sound of prophecy moving closer. The Senones came south not as raiders, but as a nation. Warriors rode beside wagons piled with furs, tools, idols, and children. Their women walked barefoot beside the herds. Their elders sang of rivers and vengeance. At their head rode Brennus, broad-shouldered, bearded, his eyes the colour of storm clouds. The Gauls moved like weather, an avalanche with rhythm. They passed through valleys in a haze of dust, drums rolling like distant thunder. "We thought God himself rode with the king," wrote a monk centuries later, "until we saw the horizon darken. Every dawn, the line grew longer, men from other tribes joining, drawn by promise and fury alike. They did not sneak south. They announced themselves. In every hoofbeat was warning, in every chant, inevitability. The forest itself seemed to follow them, the echo of its branches now the heartbeat of doom. While the horizon filled with dust, Rome basked in peace. Markets overflowed with foreign goods. Senators debated statues and spoils. Temples glittered under new marble facades. The city believed its triumph eternal. Scouts spoke of distant northern wanderers, but the Senate laughed. Barbarians could never threaten the Republic. On the Aventine, Children played with wooden swords beneath the same sun that gilded the Senate's roofs. Farmers harvested along the Tiber, unarmed, unafraid. Rome's gods seemed content, her walls untested. Yet, beyond the Apennines, the Senones were already crossing rivers, driving their wagons through dusk. No omens warned the people, no thunder split the sky, only a faint vibration in the earth, like drums far away. When night fell, Rome slept soundly beneath its shining rooftops, dreaming of destiny. By morning, destiny would be marching toward it. The city that believed in forever stood on the brink of its first fall. They came not as soldiers, but as a nation in motion. 30,000 souls, warriors, women, children, oxen, wagons, gods carved from oak, rolling south in a single current of dust and thunder. This was not conquest as Rome understood it. It was migration wrapped in vengeance. The Senones' war banners flapped above carts filled with grain and bronze, their warriors painted in lime, faces glowing white beneath the sun. Their cries carried for miles, fierce and rhythmic, half song, half storm. To the Roman scouts, it looked less like an army and more like the earth itself moving. Every step south sent echoes down the valleys, each wheel turn like a drumbeat, the sound of inevitability. Rome had never seen a war like this. A war with no borders, no clear beginning, and no promise of end. A people were coming, and they brought their world with them. Word reached Rome like a fever. The Gauls were near. Smoke on the northern horizon, villages silent, traders gone. In the Senate, panic churned beneath marble calm. Livy wrote that the senators spoke with trembling voices and looked to one another for courage. The name Brennus became a curse whispered in corridors. Quintus Sulpicius Longus was appointed commander. His orders simple: stop them. 6 legions, 40,000 men, were mustered overnight, half of them farmers who had never fought beyond their fields. They marched north toward the river Allia, 11 miles from the city, their armor unfinished, their faith untested. Rome had no plan, only pride. The plain by the river offered no advantage. Yet there they halted. The young joked, the veterans prayed. None of them knew they had already stepped into legend. Before the sun would set, there would be no army left to command. The Allia was a shallow stream, glinting under a merciless sun, too narrow for defense, too open for escape. The Romans arrayed themselves along its banks, the center on flat ground, the reserves behind, and the youngest soldiers posted nervously on a low ridge to the right. The soil beneath them was soft, the kind that remembers footprints. Across the plain, Brennus's host spread wide, thin, loose, alive. He studied the enemy in silence, noting every gap, every glint of armor turned by the light. The sun burned from behind him straight into Roman eyes. The air thickened. Men shifted uneasily in their ranks. And still, the Gauls waited. A line of painted figures shimmering in the heat, as patient as predators. The river murmured beside them, already knowing what it would carry away before the day was done. Brennus lifted his hand, and the world broke open. Horns screamed. Drums thundered. 30,000 voices rose in a roar that tore through the dust. The Gauls surged forward, not in lines, but in waves, each man shouting his own battle cry, each strike a hymn to chaos. The Romans froze, blinded by sun and fear. The right wing, the ridge, shuddered first, then shattered. The youngest soldiers fled before the Gauls even reached them. Brennus's warriors poured down the slope, hacking, crushing, screaming. Dust boiled across the field. The center tried to hold, for seconds no more, before collapsing in on itself. Shields clanged, men stumbled, standards fell. The sound was not of battle, but of breaking, of discipline turning to dust. From the hilltops, the Romans looked down on their own destruction, and then they ran. Livy would write simply, "It was not a fight, but a flight." The plain became a graveyard. Men fled toward the river, armor flashing in the light. Some stumbled into the shallows, desperate to swim, their shields dragging them down. Others clawed for the far bank, slipping on wet reeds slick with blood. Arrows whistled, spears struck water, and the Allia turned red. Horses reared, screaming, tripping over the fallen. The Gauls did not fight, they hunted. Their laughter rolled over the river like thunder. No trumpet called retreat, no officer gave command. The Roman line was gone, its name erased before noon. The survivors who reached the other side crawled through mud and reeds, gasping, broken, unarmed. Behind them, the water carried helmets and corpses alike toward the Tiber, toward Rome. When the wind shifted, the air smelled of iron and salt. The river flowed on, its banks heavy with silence and memory. By dusk, the survivors stumbled through the city gates, wild-eyed, breathless. "They're coming," they gasped. "The Gauls are coming." Panic spread like fire through narrow streets. Families loaded carts, carrying children and goats, dragging what they could south towards safety. Priests lifted the sacred flame of Vesta from her temple, shielding it with trembling hands as they fled. In the Forum, the marble statues seemed to watch in silence. On the Capitoline Hill, the Senate gathered for what would be their last session. The elders refused to run. They dressed in robes of office, seated themselves in curule chairs, and waited, faces calm, eyes hollow. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Smoke rose to the north. Rome's walls glowed faintly in the twilight, the city holding its breath before the storm. When the wind shifted, even the gods seemed silent. The night that followed would belong to Brennus. 7 days after Allia, the Gauls reached the gates of Rome and found them open. No guards, no resistance, only silence heavy as smoke. They entered not as conquerors, but as witnesses to something already dead. The northern wind moved through narrow alleys, rattling shutters. Doors hung ajar, tables still set with bread gone hard. A child's toy lay in the dust beside a fallen amphora. In the Forum, pigeons perched upon the statues of gods, their marble faces streaked with ash. The Gauls advanced cautiously, blades drawn, uncertain if they walked among the living or the ghosts. No sound met them but the echo of their own boots. The empire that would one day rule the world lay before them. Hollow, breathless, stripped of its voice. For the first time, Rome did not fall by war. It simply ceased to exist. In the heart of the Forum, they found them, the elders of Rome, seated in a silent row, robes white, faces stern, ivory rods clasped like scepters of defiance. The Gauls paused, confused. They had expected screams, not statues. One warrior stepped forward, reached to touch the beard of an old man. The senator's eyes flicked open. With his last strength, he struck the intruder across the face. For a heartbeat, time froze. Then steel sang. The old men fell one by one, robes torn, blood pooling beneath curule chairs. No cries, no pleas, only the thud of bodies against stone. When it was done, the Gauls stood amid the ruin, breathing hard. Above them, the marble gods looked on, unmoved. Thus ended the Senate of Rome. When the silence broke, it was with fire. Flames leapt from the temples of Vesta and Saturn. Smoke poured down the avenues like a tide. The bronze doors of Jupiter's shrine melted in the heat. Statues cracked and fell. Sacred scrolls curled into ash. The city that once glittered with victory became a furnace of loss. The Gauls moved through it like scavengers through a grave, their torches reflected in pools of molten gold. But above the inferno, one hill still shone through the haze, the Capitoline, fortress of the last 1,000 Romans. Behind its walls burned the final flame of Vesta, guarded by priests and soldiers alike. Below them, the conquerors shouted, drunk with victory. Above, the defenders knelt before their gods, whispering to ashes. The city of stone had become smoke, and yet, Rome still had a heartbeat, flickering atop the hill. It happened on a night without moon. The Gauls crept up the Capitoline's cliffs, climbing in silence, hands gripping roots, eyes fixed on the sleeping fortress above. No horns, no armor, only breath and stone. But in the temple of Juno, sacred geese stirred. Their cries split the darkness, wild, piercing, divine. The Romans awoke to chaos. Marcus Manlius, once a consul, seized his shield and rushed to the wall. He hurled stones, then men, into the black void below. The attackers fell, screaming into the gorge. Torches flared, blades flashed, feathers drifted through smoke. When dawn came, the ground below was littered with bodies. The capital still stood. Rome had been saved, not by soldiers, but by wings and instinct. The gods had spoken, and for one night they chose mercy. Winter came with no deliverance. The Gauls settled among the ruins, their fires glowing in the streets below. On the Capitoline, the survivors dwindled. Leather boiled for food, grass scraped from between stones. Children cried without sound. Disease crept through the temple halls, leaving bodies beneath cracked mosaics. The priests still burned incense, though the smoke was bitter with rot. From his camp below, Brennus waited, patient, implacable, as if time itself served him. He knew they could not last. The Romans looked down each morning to see smoke rising from their own homes, now Gaulish hearths. Hope thinned with every sunrise. The once mighty republic had been reduced to a fortress of shadows, 1,000 hearts beating slower each day, praying that death would come with honor, not hunger. At last, Rome yielded. A truce was struck. 1,000 pounds of gold for the city's freedom. In the ruins of the Forum, a scale was set upon a broken altar. Gauls brought weights. Romans brought treasure. The coins clinked softly, their sound almost reverent. Then came protest. The weights were false, too heavy. A Roman officer shouted, voice cracking with fury. Brennus turned slowly, eyes cold, and drew his sword. With a single motion, he threw it onto the scales. The beams sank. "Vae victis," he said. "Woe to the conquered." The words hung in the smoke like a curse. No one moved. The Romans stared, not at the gold, but at the truth it carried. In that moment, empire was born, not through glory, but through humiliation. The sword glinted atop the gold, the weight of defeat made visible, and all of Rome bowed beneath it. Morning came without sound. The Gauls were gone, vanished into mist and rumor. Some said disease had thinned them. Others whispered that Camillus, Rome's exiled general, had returned to strike them down on the road. But no victory song was sung, no triumph recorded, only smoke. The city they left behind was a carcass. Blackened beams jutting from pools of rain, temple stones still hissing from the night's fire. The air smelled of lime and blood, a silence so complete it rang. Soldiers wandered through the ruins as if trespassing in a dream. No one spoke of deliverance. Rome had not been saved. It had endured, and that was all. Between the broken columns and the scorched streets, the world's future power sat weeping in the ashes, too weak to imagine empire, too proud to admit defeat. The fire was gone. The wound remained. The loss was not measured in walls, but in memory. The sacred archives, treaties, genealogies, laws, burned into nothing. Bronze tablets split, wax seals melted, names erased from existence. The republic's past dissolved in the heat. No one could trace their ancestors. No one could prove their rights. History itself had been conquered. In the weeks that followed, the survivors moved like ghosts through a grey city, burying their dead without markers. Too many bodies, too little ground. The air stank of decay and rain. The Tiber ran black with ash. A priest tried to recite the ancient prayers and forgot the words. Rome had lost more than soldiers. It had lost itself. When the fires finally died, the people who remained no longer recognized their city. The Rome that rose from these ruins would not be the same. It would remember, but it would never forgive. Amid the ruins, the Senate gathered, not in marble halls, but on the open ground of the Forum, a place now stripped of colour and sound. No togas of state, no carved chairs, only rubble for seats and rain dripping through broken roofs. They spoke little. There were no debates, no decrees, only a vow. Rome would rise, not for honour, not for glory, but because it must. The men who once argued policy now stood in silence, staring at the smoke curling over their city. One senator laid the shattered rods of office, the fasces, upon a stone and whispered a prayer to no god in particular. This was not ceremony. It was rebirth. Rome would never again mistake pride for power. It would rebuild, stronger, colder. From this silence came the empire's first heartbeat. From ruin came resolution. The Gauls had given Rome its greatest curse and its greatest purpose. The city swore never again. The Allia became a date of dread, marked in black wax, forbidden for battle or law. Builders raised walls higher, their hammers echoing like vows. The legions trained until exhaustion was their prayer. Discipline replaced faith. Vigilance became virtue. The republic that emerged from ashes no longer trusted the gods. It trusted itself. Fear hardened into ritual, loss into architecture. The wound was not hidden. It was built into every gate, every stone. Rome had learned that memory could be armor. The scar was its new foundation. All of Rome's future echoed from this fire. Every wall, every legion, every march northward was a reply to the humiliation of Allia. When Hannibal came, they fought him not as soldiers, but as survivors. When Caesar crossed into Gaul, he carried the memory of Brennus with every step. Even Augustus, centuries later, ruled with the shadow of that vow behind him, that Rome would never kneel again. The empire's discipline, its relentlessness, its cruelty, all traced back to the ashes. Rome had learned to make vengeance its identity. What began as fear became doctrine. Every conquest, every triumphal arch was an argument against that day when the gods turned away. Rome's greatness was not born from ambition, but from the terror of being conquered. Centuries passed, yet the ground remembered. Farmers still found bronze shards in their ploughs, fragments of armor polished by rain. In spring, when the floods receded, pale bones surfaced along the Allia's bend, horses, soldiers, nameless dead. Their silence, wrote one ancient chronicler, is heavier than victory. The river flowed as it always had, slow and indifferent, its banks rich with grass. Children played where legions had drowned. The Tiber carried fragments of the city downstream, bits of tile and bone glinting in sunlight. Rome would rise again. It would rule, enslave, build, and burn the world in turn. But here, where the Allia met the Tiber, time stood still. The wind that moved through the reeds still whispered of fire, of failure, of vows spoken in ashes. Empires forget, rivers do not. From the ruins of 387 BCE, something new took shape. Rome did not rebuild, she reforged. The city that once trusted marble and omen now trusted memory and will. Every wall raised after the fire bore the mark of fear turned to purpose. The sack had stripped her bare, but in doing so revealed her truth. Endurance. No myth could protect her. No god could avenge her. Only discipline. Only vigilance. From that lesson, empire began. Streets straightened. Forts multiplied. The soldiers who once fled the Allia trained their sons to hold the line. Out of humiliation came the clarity of destiny. The republic that rose from ash no longer believed it was eternal. It decided to make itself so. Rome learned that glory fades, but survival remembers. Every legion that marched after 387 carried a ghost. Brennus had vanished, but his shadow walked beside them. The memory of the Allia whispering beneath the rhythm of the drums. Rome's soldiers did not fight for expansion. They fought to silence that echo. Training became ritual. Precision became prayer. The line that once broke now stood unyielding. Never again, said every shield as it locked into place. The ghost of defeat became Rome's unseen general, teaching vigilance through shame, unity through fear. Even centuries later, when Caesar crossed Gaul, the men in his ranks still bore that inheritance. They did not march north as conquerors. They marched as survivors, reclaiming what their ancestors had lost. The ghosts of Allia never left. They only learned to wear iron. Fear became Rome's scripture. The Allia was not just a battle lost. It was a calendar etched in shame. No war would ever again be fought on its anniversary. No soldier would forget the cost of arrogance. In every barracks the vow endured, vigilance without rest, discipline without mercy. What Rome lost in faith, she replaced with order. Blacksmiths forged not just swords but symbols, gladi that gleamed like oaths. The city built higher walls, but its true fortress was its memory. That day by the river was never buried. It was welded into Rome's soul. A wound turned weapon, a promise that no enemy would ever again walk her streets alive. Generations passed, and Rome turned her fear into a map. The legions moved north, step by step, across every river they once ran from. The Po, the Rhone, the Rhine. Each crossing was an act of exorcism. Villages burned where once she had burned. The Gauls were no longer legends but lessons. Rome did not simply conquer them, she rewrote them. The land that once birthed Brennus became Roman ground, its languages silenced, its gods forgotten. To the Senate, these victories were expansion. To the soldiers, they were penance. Every triumphal procession through the Forum was a whisper to the past. We remember. The Republic's vengeance outlived its grief, turning rivers of defeat into highways of empire. Now the Allia runs quiet again. The fields are green, the air clean, the sky unchanged. Yet the earth beneath still carries its ghosts. Beneath the grass lie fragments of bronze and bone, darkened by centuries but never gone. In spring, when floods recede, farmers still find spearheads among their furrows, black with age, heavy with story. The water glides gently over stones that once ran red. No monument marks the place. None is needed. The river remembers. It moves slowly, deliberately, carrying echoes instead of words. The same current that once bore the dead now nourishes the living, but it has not forgotten the sound of falling shields. The Allia became more than a battlefield. It became a witness, one that has never stopped whispering. Empires rise in thunder and collapse in silence, but their echoes endure. The sack of Rome lasted mere days. Its echo has never ended. It shaped every law, every march, every empire that followed. The lesson of 387 BCE was not power, but permanence. What breaks you becomes what builds you, if you remember. Rome's greatness was not born of glory, but of ghosts. Each generation inherited the silence left behind at the Allia and filled it with conquest, ceremony, empire. And when that empire finally fell, the silence returned. The same wind over the same river, whispering the same truth. Power fades, stone crumbles, but memory endures.